I'm just going to leave this here for just a minute with absolutely no context, and we'll talk about it here in just a minute. This is what I'm talking about. I mean, is this even the same story? Is this even the same manga at this point? The tone shift is insane. I don't know if he had an epiphany, if he just figured out like, oh, this is what I should be doing, and it's not like, well, we're going to get a quick backstory for our dude, some context as to who he is and why he is the way he is, which is what we're doing. But it's not like I said, it's not like a quick, oh, well, this is his story, because we could have done that and moved on. No, this is like, okay, now we're going to go back and now we're just going to start over. I don't know. There's seriously, there's no Puck. So his weird, that whole style that he represented is just gone. There's no monsters of any kind yet. And even though everything is so extreme in his backstory, it still somehow feels incredibly grounded, or at least in comparison to the last arc, this one just feels so much more grounded than the last one. It's just crazy just how extreme the shift in both tone, storytelling, everything. Kind of blows your mind a little bit as you're reading. And at this point, we might as well discuss Guts' origin story. This is quite possibly the most extreme backstory I have ever seen for any character ever. I mean, he is born of a corpse and taken in by this band, mercenaries, and while he's being raised by an abusive man, the one lady who's raising him as adopted mother dies while he's continuing to be abused. Then he's sold, for lack of a better term. I'm going to avoid using any other word for that here. Then he has to rise up, face his abusive father figure, and then kill him and move out to face the world alone. I mean, it is just back to back to back to back ridiculous. I mean, over the top in just about every possible conceivable way. So you get this backdrop of absolute trauma that he has been born into and raised with, the trauma that is him. And as I'm reading it, I thought, at first I'm like, oh, well, this is kind of cool. And then as it just kind of piles on more and more and more and more and more, and it was just so extreme, I actually started to get worried, like, is this too much from a storytelling perspective? And I'm going to bring this back to my childhood. Bear with me for just a second. Back when I was a teenager, I was going to be a dungeon master for the first time in my entire life. Actually, it's kind of like the only time too, now that I look back on it. But anyway, and I created it, and I'm doing it, and I'm running the show and everything. And one of the people that was in the campaign was a friend of mine who was also a dungeon master, far more experienced one than myself, mind you. And somebody would roll like a 20, if that tells you anything about which system we were playing with. Anyway, somebody would roll like a 20, and critical roll. Okay, all right. Not a 1, by the way. This is the first system to switch from rolling a 1 to rolling a 20, if that helps. I've gotten so far off track here. Anyway, but somebody would roll a critical roll, and I would immediately, I'd be like, oh, and you swing around and you jump up and you come down and the sword hits them here and it cuts them down to here and their body flops in half. I would go really bonkers with it, and I did that several times in a row on our like first day of playing, and we all disband and we give up. And he pulled me aside like later on. He's like, you might want to tone it back on the critical hits. And I'm like, why? But it was a critical and it was super awesome. And he's like, yeah, but if you go too far too fast or too hard too fast, then you don't have anywhere to go. And then you feel like you should be escalating where you have nowhere to escalate to because you went too far too fast. And ultimately he was correct. in that line of thinking. So this is where I feel like these people, Miura, I hope I'm saying that right. Miura, as I'm reading it, I'm going, is he making that mistake, going too far, too fast? And ultimately, long story short, I think he comes down just on the right side of that line. I think it ended up working. It was real close, though, to being too much. But like I said, ultimately, I think he came down on the right side of that line. It was okay. He threaded that needle by it was close. And then he moves on. Like, you feel like, okay, so we've made our point, and now we're going to move forward with the story, which would have been perfectly serviceable, and it would have done a plenty good enough job in illustrating what this guy's backstory is and who he is and the trauma that made him. But there's one little extra layer to it that is just tips it so far above and beyond into the realm of just making it pitch perfect, and that's the fact that he then goes on to have nightmares. There's something about the nightmares that just sells it for me. The fact that we have to sit there and read through his nightmares as this childhood and everything that has happened to him in his life literally just continues to haunt him. It's really heartbreaking, and it's really effective. It's impressive. And what I really want to illustrate here at this point is just how believable all of this feels. It doesn't feel like just completely over the top and cartoonish. I know it is over the top, but even the character of, I don't know, whatever his name is, the stepfather figure, it doesn't feel too overly cartoonish as it's happening. Sure, he's the absolute worst, and sure, he hates Guts for all the wrong reasons, and he maybe didn't necessarily love or even care for the woman that he ended up losing, but he lost her. And he's going to hold that against Guts, and then he's going to take it out on Guts. And like I said, these feel like legitimate reasons that somebody would do this to another person. Even that character feels logical in his execution. I was just super impressed. And then there's Griffith. And boy, oh boy, do I love the characterization of Griffith. I don't mean that I love Griffith, because Griffith is just terrible. And so when I say I love the characterization of him, I love the way that he's done. So many times have you heard people say, beware of the charming and the beautiful, or even, Frank Herbert had his whole quote, beware of charismatic leaders. So many times it has been attempted to do a character like this. Somebody that's charismatic and strong and beautiful and just really warms people up to him and wins them over, and just this real slippery snake kind of a character. And this is not new, but boy, I don't know if I've ever seen it executed this successfully. I cannot think of a better example of this idea being executed this well. And the fact that you know from the last arc that this is the ultimate big bad, like the ultimate big bad of the whole everything. And somehow you still meet this character and you're like immediately you're like, oh, he's not such a bad little guy when you meet him. Very quickly you're like, oh, you're a little asshole, aren't you? I mean, pretty much the second he's like, I own you now, you're like, oh yeah, that's right, you're a piece of shit. But it's that where this is going, and it's still, you're like, yeah, this guy's kind of awesome. It's good. And it's when I say good, I mean, boy, he's good, Miura, at doing what he does with the characterizations here. And then, of course, I talked a whole bunch about art in the last one, and I'm going to call it right here, as far as the improving of the art to the crazy blow your mind stuff that I was talking about, this isn't it. I would call the art in this one an improvement. I would call it incremental. It wasn't like some massive step up, which is fine. We're moving in the right direction. But as far as the grand scope of you flipping a page and just going, oh my God, mind blown, that's just the most amazing thing I've ever seen. We're not there yet. But what I did notice in this one, and it might have been in the last one, but I sure didn't notice it, but I sure stood up and took notice in this one, is the subtlety in the art. And not in like some minute detail, but in like expressions and the expressiveness, the subtlety of what was conveyed and what you were supposed to get when you looked at the picture. There's so much intention in the artwork. And when I say that, I mean, I'm not an art major. What he intended to convey with that image was absolutely conveyed, and it was done masterfully well. So instead of pushing the envelope in detail and complexity and beauty of the piece, it was more in the subtlety and the intended purpose of the image doing what he wants it to do to you. And it was just a huge step up from the last book. At least I'm noticing it, and I'm noticing it infinitely more than I did in the last one. And I'm not even going to lie, I was a little bit bummed when Zod showed up because I was enjoying, I don't know, the story so much that when you know, big monsters and fight scenes started like coming back around, I was like, oh, you know, which is awesome. Because normally, you know, you're watching something like Inuyasha, bear with me on all these ridiculous references, but you're watching something like Inuyasha and the big fight scenes and what's his name? Oh my God, what's his name? Naraku. Anyway, Naraku, like, you know, oh no, he disappears, and then you go on this lull for character development for a few episodes, and then the creatures come back and you're like, oh, thank God the action's back. You know, I was getting real tired of watching, you know, little Kikyo and Kagome arguing over there. I'm really dating myself with how old these animes are that I talk about. Anyway, so normally I should be like, yay, the monsters and the fighting and the action is back, but I was actually a little bit bummed. I was like, oh man, I was really enjoying the story, and I'm really bummed that Zod's here to break up the story, and now I gotta watch this fight scene, I guess. Which it was fine, by the way. But what I did really like about that is the fact that they really don't win. They kind of lose, and they both kind of come at them together, and they still kind of lose, which was great because, you know, Guts spent the last book being such a hard ass. Oh, you know, the weak deserve to die, and, you know, all of that mumbo jumbo. And then we see this flashback to him just getting stomped into the ground. You're like, now, who deserves to die, Guts? Oh, the weak? The weak? All right, just checking. Just making sure I understood you. But, you know, so that was good. Okay, so we've got Guts' backstory out of the way. Then we've got Guts meeting Griffith out of the way. And Griffith and the Band of the Hawk coming, and he gets folded into the mix. Well, now we get another, like, massive tone shift. We settle into castle life? I don't know. He's now kind of a member of the group, and now he's treated differently. He acts differently because he's not necessarily an outsider anymore. He's been there long enough that daily life involves him now. And in so, we start to get some group dynamics, and we start to get a little bit of lighthearted antics coming around. It starts to become, dare I say, a little soap opera-y at parts, just in the way that they interact, in the way that the story's happening and unfolding here for us. And none of this is to imply that it's bad. I'm just trying to describe the new dynamic that we find ourselves in here in this portion of the story. This is also the part of the story where some of my absolute favorite humor starts to come into play. With an anime or a manga, this dark and this gritty, this silly, childish humor that pops up kind of feels out of place, and I don't Sometimes I'll even like kind of roll my eyes at it like, oh God, here we go. Yeah, I don't appreciate it the way I think it was intended to be appreciated. It's just not my thing. But this particular section brought some humor beats that I found myself actually like quite laughing at. But of the humor beats, this section had the best. We're not quite there yet, but since I'm talking about funny, my absolute favorite of all favorites is a little bit further on down the book when Griffith calls Guts into his office and he's talking about the wonders of books, and Guts is literally like, blah, 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 books are dumb. And Griffith's like, even books like this? And he opens up like a book of porn, and Guts is just all about it. 2 seconds later, he's like, what? I'm sorry, what were you saying? It's comedy gold, and I couldn't help it. I literally had to stop reading for a second because that one just hit me just the right way. And before we move on too much further, at this point, the most impressive thing about any of this to me is Griffith's characterization, because at no point does he ever drop the ball. He's forever showing every step. He is manipulating every single person that he speaks to. Every time he opens his mouth, everything he does is a manipulation. He is a master manipulator. He is manipulating everything around him. You know, and it's just so impressive. And it's so minute. Like, for example, when they're hurt after Zod and they're having their first conversation after he says something to Griffith. It's like that. It's like what you said to me 3 years ago. Can't lose a warrior as good as you, or something like that. And Griffith goes, huh, you remember a conversation from 3 years ago? Like he doesn't. You know, like, you know, he remembers, you know, he's got, it's just a little, you're like, you son of a bitch. He knows. He's constantly manipulating these people just inch by inch, just get them to where he needs them to be. Or like when he places, you know, himself immediately next to the princess on purpose, and then when she falls, catches her, and then he gets hit in the face for doing it. He knew what he was doing when he was doing it. He knows what he's doing, and it's all very calculated. So we're going to set Griffith up to be this all-knowing mastermind of everything, and he's going to pick the most inept person possible for a job. I doubt it. I doubt Griffith is dumb. Which leads us to assassin, right? Now we're in assassin, and he's going to send Guts to be the assassin. Yeah, okay. But he sends him, and he runs into this Count guy abusing his son in the same way that he was abused as a child. So now we have a parallel between his childhood and this other boy over here. And you think, okay, here we go. Now we have something to latch onto, because if you really think about it, at this point, Guts is an agent for Griffith, who's the bad guy. So does that make these people that Guts is getting ready to go kill the good guys? Oh, well, no, apparently not. Because, you know, now we're seeing just how awful they are as well. It lets you feel better about that. You're immediately like, oh, okay, so we don't have to feel bad. I mean, he's working for a bad guy, but he's also killing bad guys. So we don't have to be too worried, right? But then it all goes so wrong so fast. And in the last video, I talked about, for some reason, I was surprised that this manga had the ability to surprise me. And even now, having technically seen this portion of it, I don't remember that in the anime. And if it was there, oh boy, I must have blocked it out or something, because the second that little kid gets stabbed, I'm just, oh. You know, they were setting something up, and I don't know if I'm just dense, but boy, that went right over my head. I didn't see it coming. And which is truly awful. Once again, just the emotion that flows off of the page as you see some of these images as this plays out, and you just sit there and you're just, I don't know how to explain just how hard-hitting some of the beats are in this manga. I'm just going to keep saying how impressive some of this is. And then it immediately sends him straight back into those nightmares. You barely even get a break before he goes straight to having horrible nightmares about this. They re-trigger all of his trauma. And then from here, it is just downhill. From his nightmare to then he shows up in, I don't know if it's a tavern or whatever, but he shows up to wherever the rest of the band is, just completely distraught, completely disheveled. And he goes straight for the one person, his comfort zone, I guess, rock, maybe. I don't know what you'd call Griffith at this point, but it's the one friend that he has in life, the one person that he feels good around. It's not a true friend because Griffith is just using him and manipulating him and grooming him for some purpose, but he's not a real friend. But Guts doesn't know this, so he goes to the one person that he feels is going to be there. You know, he needs comfort right now. And so he goes looking for it. When he finds him, he's in the process of manipulating somebody else, and he overhears it, and now he's seeing Griffith from afar, and Griffith do what Griffith does, but Griffith's now he's manipulating a different person, and because what he has to say to this person is going to run counter to what he's had to say to Guts, because you know he's going to custom tailor anything and everything he says to the person that he's saying it to, because he needs to twist this screw in just this way in order to get them to do what he needs them to do. So Guts, I don't know if Guts is smart enough to put all the pieces together, but at the very least he's crushed, because what he's hearing is these people that work for me aren't my friends, they are beneath me. Nobody that is not my equal could possibly ever be my friend. They are nothing but beneath me. They are basically servants to me. That's not what he says, but that's kind of like the gist that Guts has laid on his shoulders in this scene. So he goes from killing a kid to spiraling into his nightmares to going to look for the one person that he feels is going to be there and getting crushed because he overhears that person saying, "These people are nothing but beneath me." It's just, wow. I mean, it just went down and down and down, and you land on this note. And that's where I chose to stop. Because now, after that, they go off to and it's like, off to the front lines or something like that. And I'm like, we're going to wait. I'll just pause right here. That feels like a real good stopping point now that I'm truly and fully depressed. You know, like, I don't know. But, so anyway, oh my God. And I don't know what to call this. I don't even know what to rate this. I feel like I shouldn't be rating these at all, I'm going to be honest. But this one I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw it up to an 8. And I feel like that should probably be more than an 8. If I'm being fully honest at just how good that really was. But I feel like I need to have some room to grow or move, because if it continues to, maybe this is like the best it'll ever get. And I don't think so, though. But I want to be able to, I need some breathing room. You know. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll definitely see you next time, because I'll be coming back for more of this.